Now, I like to think of myself as a man who is courteous and respectful. I like to hold doors open for people. I let cars merge onto my lane of traffic. I offer my seat on a crowded bus to an older person. You could call it chivalry. I just call it good manners, a bit of human civility, trying to be a good citizen. Most of us would do the same. Now, I like to think that my intentions in these circumstances are pure, but it doesn't always work that way. So one time I was on a train. It was filled to capacity and then some. People were huddling together, trying not to fall over each other as the train jolted to a stop at each station. Now, I got on early. I had a nice window seat. And after about 3 stops, I noticed an older lady boarding the train. And she looked from left to right, searching in vain for a seat. No one budged. And my sense of good manners kicked in. So I raised my hand and indicated to the lady that she could take my seat. So I duly got up and let her sit down. She took my place and proceeded to take out her book and read. Hang on a minute, I thought. She never thanked me. She didn't so much as smile or nod in acknowledgement of my free gift. She owed me that at least, right? Well, I thought to myself, if I could take that seat back, I would. Then I realized maybe my free gift wasn't so free after all. My good deed wasn't as selfless as I had previously thought. In fact, at some level, the deal was, I'll give you my seat in exchange for you thanking me in front of all of these people. My pride was hurt that day. But maybe that wasn't so bad after all, because it taught me a valuable lesson. You see, so much of what we do is governed by this rule of civility. I'll scratch your back, and you can scratch mine. Sometimes it's very obvious, like when you're at the movie theater. Hey, if you buy the popcorn, I'll buy the drinks. There's a promise to do something, and here's what you can do for me in return. It's part and parcel of our lives. In fact, it's how most economies work. The very fabric of our society is built on this quid pro quo. But it even permeates to a whole range of other interactions that are much more subtle. Now, be honest. Have you ever said, let's invite the neighbours over for dinner? They'll have to invite us back, and I am dying to see their new extension. Or maybe you've been involved in organising a wedding. Settling on an invite list is never easy. And maybe this has happened to you, but I remember at my sister's wedding, the number of potential invitees had skyrocketed. It's a difficult call. Who makes the final list and who gets the cut? Now, my sister was ruthlessly suggesting names, saying we don't have enough room for them. My parents would respond, we have to invite them. They invited us to their daughter's wedding. Now, to our human minds, this makes perfect sense. It's only being fair, it's maintaining a sense of balance. It's human civility. And so the back-scratching must go on. But here's the problem. If we merely live by this rule of civility, then there is a real risk that it can downward spiral. It's not just a matter of I'll scratch your back and you'll scratch mine, but I'm not scratching your back, until you scratch mine first. So our coexistence descends into skepticism, and our skepticism descends into animosity, and a stalemate ensues. A stalemate where we become suspicious of each other and centered on ourselves. I don't want to be bothered by anyone. You live your life, I live mine. Thank you very much. Now, this stalemate can persist for a long time, sometimes even a lifetime. But the story of Christianity shatters this quid pro quo. In fact, our gospel today sets out the very essence of what should define us as Christians. It speaks of a reckless generosity, a mercy that is uncapped, a love that knows no limits. It is what I call a heroic charity. And Jesus is calling us to this heroic charity, where our actions aren't based on what we can get in return. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Now, does this make sense to you? Because I find it very difficult to wrap my head around it. I don't think I'm the only one. These are challenging words, radical words. And the words of Jesus were as radical in the first century as they are now. You see, in Judaism in the first century, at the time of Jesus, there were certain rules around punishments for sins and crimes. We call it the law of retaliation, or an eye for an eye. At the time, this was considered civil. So if you murdered your neighbor, you would be sentenced to death. And if you injured your neighbor's arm in a fight and he could no longer work in the fields, then the same would be done to you, or you would pay an agreed penalty. Now, the law of retaliation was actually quite a novelty in its day, quite revolutionary. It meant that if your brother was killed, you couldn't just go and kill the perpetrator along with his whole family in revenge. An eye for an eye limited repercussions so that only one eye would be given for one eye. Sounds fair? Yet you may have heard the phrase, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. In the past, it was love your friends and hate your enemies. But God has raised the bar throughout history. And in Jesus, this has been expanded to love your friends and love your enemies too. The former limits have been shattered. In fact, there are no limits because God has no limits. You see, every other legal text or code in human history that set forth how we are to live our lives has had limits, and in a way, maybe they had to. But their interest lies in what it means to be a good citizen, how to be civil. And in many ways, today's gospel is like the Christian Magna Carta, except it goes way beyond what has been enshrined in any rule of law in human history. The UN Charter of Human Rights pales in comparison. Because the gospel is not only about what it means to be a good citizen, it's concerned with what it means to be a Christian, a follower of Christ. And the gospel of Jesus Christ doesn't hold back. In fact, it's radical, it's almost absurd, illogical, crazy to our human minds. How can it make sense to give your shirt to someone who's just stolen your coat. And so when you think of this challenge, we think, how can all of this be applied in our lives? We are only human after all. But Jesus too was human. And he is the one who is calling us to this heroic charity, to be a hero for his sake. Forgiveness is one form of heroic charity. But forgiveness is not easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be heroic. And one author put it like this: everyone says forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. It's true. The idea of forgiveness sounds good. But when someone has really hurt you, suddenly it becomes much more difficult. But look at Jesus' own life as an example to us. In his passion, he was mocked, stripped, spat upon, beaten, crucified, and left to die an agonizing death. And yet in all of this, he was able to pray, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." We are called to exercise this kind of heroic charity. Or think of the heroic charity of Pope John Paul II. Now, in 1981, a Turkish man called Mehmet Ali Agca attempted to assassinate the Pope in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. The assassin shot 4 bullets at the Pope, 2 of which hit him in the stomach. He was rushed to hospital, and life-saving surgery was performed. And miraculously, the Pope survived. And sometime later, he visited the very man who wanted to kill him in prison. And there, he forgave him. That took guts. That took courage. That was heroic charity. Some 26 years later, Mehmet Ali Agca became a Catholic. You see, our acts of heroic charity, like forgiveness, have an effect on those around us. They have the potential to inspire and move others to heroic charity also. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. What if Jesus is calling us to heroic charity today by asking us to forgive someone who perhaps you think does not deserve forgiveness? But instead of waiting in civility, in this kind of stalemate, Jesus is calling us to take a first step in heroic charity. Now maybe you're saying, well, that's fine for the saints, but it's too big of an ask for me. And I'd say, yes, the call to heroic charity is colossal. Forgiving others, forgiving myself even, is not easy. Blessing those who curse us, doing good to those who hate us, doesn't make sense. But Jesus did all of these. And he is the one who says, what is impossible for people is possible with God. On our own, they are too much. But with God's help, we can live lives of heroic charity. But imagine, even if we only got it 5% right, I'd still bet that there would be no build-up of troops on the borders of Russia and Ukraine. The words of Jesus, "Love your enemies," would prove too strong. But as St. Benedict, we're not interested in 5%. We're interested in being full-blown Christians who live out our calling to heroic charity every day. We're interested in loving all our enemies, in doing good to all who hate us, in blessing all who curse us, in praying for all who abuse us, in forgiving all who have hurt us, and in begging forgiveness from all those we ourselves have hurt. And when we do this, people will look to us and say, wow, that must be a Christian. Look, there goes a Christian. And they too may be inspired to be a hero for Jesus Christ.